Hi, everyone.
Oh, are we starting?
Yeah.
I
What was that?
I thought you were gonna start recording and then we were gonna warm up to it, but
Hi, everyone.
Who's everyone?
Classmates and all the people that are going to watch this.
Should I say hi, Gwen's classmate?
Hi, everyone. My name is Gwen.
Hi, I'm Calvin.
I'm Jack.
This is the first video in our podcast titled The Awkward Pause. Today, we're going to be talking about implicit bias and stereotypes. All right.
So for those who don't know, this podcast's mission is trying to figure out if we're actually as interesting as we say we are.
My guess is no, we're not.
We could take our bets. I would also say no.
My first question, or I guess the question to start us off is, since this is about implicit bias, so what do you guys think implicit bias is? And is it something that you guys encounter a lot? Whoever wants to go can go first.
Implicit bias. When I think of implicit bias, my mind goes to kind of like subconscious assumptions that people make about other people. My mind immediately goes to like subconscious racism, but maybe that's just me.
So I'm basically the same way. Implicit bias for me is, subconscious like bias, stereotypes, and general assumptions that you make in your day-to-day life that more often than not affect your actions, but more so your mentality. And you may not even notice it because it's subconscious. So
Yeah.
that's where it's like, it has like a lot of different roles, but I would say that it's definitely more talked about in racism and other specific topics, but I think it's pretty everywhere, I would say.
Yeah. I agree with both of you, just because I think it's very subconscious. Like, that's the whole idea of it being like implicit, that you don't realize that it's happening, and it's not just like it's associated a lot with racism, but I feel like it's also just like not, it's just in daily life. It's just something, and it like kind of warps your way of like the world, because you grow up just like dealing with it. So you don't think about it until they start introducing these topics in like higher education, and then you're like, oh shoot, like this has actually like impacted me in ways that I didn't think.
Like give me an example of one of those.
Like, I don't know, growing up, I feel like I've encountered some idea of like, so me being Asian, right? Let's just use that as an example. So I was around a lot of people that just assumed that I would be better than everybody else and like everything, right? Because that's the idea. Like, Asians are supposedly the model minority, which plays into like the model minority myth, all that good stuff. But it's like, you don't realize it. You just like, I played into that stereotype because I wanted to be good. So then in that sense, like, I didn't think about it until I got here, and I was like, well, I don't want to be held to these standards. I want to be held to my own standards. And it's just like, that implicit bias in itself has affected me in that way, because, it just, you know what I mean? Yeah. So do you guys encounter it a lot? Is it something you guys feel like you notice consciously?
I think it comes out in a few different ways. Most prevalent is probably it's weird because it's subconscious, right? So the weirdest part is that, like, even though the person insinuating it won't notice, you yourself may not even really notice that often either. I think some of like the better examples has always been someone mistaking me for not being born here. That's like probably the best way to like think. That's like the one that comes out in the most obvious way, because they won't realize, they will like, oh, they see you talking about Taiwan or like, wherever you're from, or your meals and blah 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 blah, and subconsciously they'll put two and two together and think that you are not born here. You know, even though I've had a lot of the same dishes that I had in Taiwan or wherever I'm from, wherever, you know, my family is from, ethnically speaking. So like, you know, and I think that's when it comes out the most. It's like, it's usually, oh, do you speak English? Oh, are you born here? It's not necessarily offensive at all times, but it's really, that's when it comes out like the most obvious. You know, it swings at me like, that's when it hits me. Is like, oh, okay, you subconsciously put two and two together because I was talking about Taiwan, the country that I am ethnically from. Right. And so you think I'm not born here, but I am, you know. So I think that's like the most obvious example I can think of, I would say.
Okay, what about you, Jack?
Well, I feel like it'd be almost impossible to not encounter it as, I don't know, as a person of color. I feel like just people of color, I feel like we just experience that no matter what, right? Like people always have kind of a different set of standards, I guess, for people who don't look like them. And I feel like I bring kind of a unique perspective to it too, since I'm half white. It's kind of like there's a lot of biases, I think, against like looking at the two different sides of my family and all the differences like between them. I find that there's like definitely a lot of biases towards me as like being the only Asian person at a gathering of white people.
Yeah, I think it's interesting too, because like, I don't know, I feel like I only notice it after the fact, or if I'm the one that's like doing the biasing, that's when I'm like, ooh, like I said something that's very assuming, and that is wrong of me. That's the only time that I notice implicit bias, or like after the fact. So like, for example, one of our friends, you know him, but I won't say his name for privacy purposes.
Let's call him Phil.
All right. So Phil here, he, like I wasn't born here, right? And I still don't have my citizenship, but I'm a permanent resident here in the US. Like I have a green card. And there's like implicit bias with like citizenship status in itself. Because like, if you think about it, if you're not citizen, then, or like you don't own a green card, it doesn't mean you're legal. You could be here on a visa. You could be an international student. You could be all this. But then, like, growing up here, since I pay in-state tuition, I lived here. If I tell people that, oh, yeah, I have my green card now, people think that I was just illegal before that. And growing up, that's what I thought it was, too. There's an implicit bias that, like, I don't know what I am. I don't know what this is. But everyone thought that because I'm not, you know, I'm not a citizen, I'm automatically illegal. You know what I mean? And I feel like that's just, like, subconscious. Like you have to know a little more information about me, but still that idea of like you don't even need to ask me, like you don't even ask me if I'm illegal or not. You're just like, oh, she most likely is, you know.
Wait, so what did Phil do?
Well, Phil asked me, he was like, oh, so before you know you got your green card, were you just like there's a term in the Philippines called TNT. It's the direct translation, or like the word is tago na tago, which means like hiding from like, you know, thing. And that's not me. I had a visa. I came here, you know, legally.
It's actually pretty interesting too, because implicit bias, while mostly racial and, you know, misogynist and drug related, a lot of, you know, everything, it can relate to every topic essentially. When it comes to racial like stuff, or when it comes to cultural stuff, it actually sometimes doesn't always come out from the other race. It can come out from like someone who's just like you. That example, I don't want to expose him too much, but he himself, Phil, is also Asian. So, and you know, I really don't want to like jump into specifics, but like that person was also like, so it's interesting to see the like how implicit bias has affected at all aspects of our life, because it doesn't just come from like, I mean, for me personally, I know it's never come from like, it doesn't just come from like one side. That's why I think it's also really hard to notice it, because it comes from everywhere sometimes. You know, it comes from your dad, it comes from your mom, it comes from like, you know, like an implicit, I don't know if this counts as implicit bias, but it definitely doesn't count as a stereotype. is when your parents raise you. Let's say your parents don't speak good English, right? They raise you to speak English, but then they throw this legal document at you at like the ripe age of like 7. So then you get confused because of course you don't know this, but they say you know English, right?
Right.
That's like an implicit bias because like implicitly, subconsciously, they assume that because you've raised English, your English is better than theirs.
Yeah.
But your English is still relative to like everyone else's.
Yeah.
Or relative to like, it's like it's a 7-year-old's, you know, and I'm not saying like I was 7 when this happened, but this happened like throughout my life. But this sort of like implicit bias is also like, it's a good example to show that like it's not just us. It's not just like us versus them. It's not like us versus us. It's them versus them.
Yeah.
It's whoever it is, about a numerous amount of topics.
Yeah. I feel like that answers like the second question, right? Like, is it something that you encounter a lot? It's just something that even if I don't think about it right now, I know I do encounter it like almost daily because it's like, I don't know. I feel like it's just a part of growing up now. Like as a minority here in the US, you will experience implicit bias at some point in your life. Like that's 100% a given, whether or not, because it's just so ingrained in the culture, like there's just so much like prejudice and so much like people just think that they know you know what I mean? And that's just like something that people can't really like, it's not like they can't, we'll go into that a little later, but it's not something like that they can't change. It's just like, that's just something that we've like just learned or like had taught to us subconsciously since we grew up, right? So how do you think you are encountering implicit bias in your everyday life, like currently?
On a daily basis, I don't I really don't know if I notice it all the time.
Yeah, so I guess like my thing is like I guess think about how it is how is it impacting you every day, because I feel like this isn't just like once in a while. This is a very daily thing.
Well, it's weird because we're in COVID now, right?
Yeah.
So you have to understand that I only see the same like 5 or 6 people every day, rotating out like 7 or 8. Okay. But I will say that if I were to find, if there were, so like I think that makes this part of the conversation a little bit more difficult in terms of like how you affect it. But it's also not to say that I haven't exactly insinuated it myself.
Oh yeah. So well, in the age of COVID, like for example, when you're in a class and they put you in a group, when you read that name, you subconsciously assume their race, do you not? Like I feel like when you read it, you're like expecting to see some form of a person in one way or another, like the way that you think it is. So I think that's how I like not just like experience, but also like in, how do you say that word? Like produce?
like
expel. What's the word?
Express.
That's how I instigate implicit bias.
I think express is a good word.
I don't know about instigate.
Yeah, I don't know what the word is, but that's how I myself that's how I contribute to the implicit bias that is around me, because like when I think about the people in my group, I'm like, oh, I expect this. And then when they introduce themselves, because we have to do introductions in this class, it's like, oh, you are not what I was expecting you to look like. But that in itself is implicit bias, because I shouldn't have assumed what they were going to look like,
That happens to me like all the time. Because I have like the whitest name, but like literally the other day I met this guy and we'd become good friends. We play chess together. And we like met in a video call for the first time and he's like, whoa, you're not white? What?
That's quite funny.
Yeah.
I feel like here's an implicit bias that I think might be incited onto Calvin. When they think Calvin Huang, they think like, oh, that's not your real name. Like that can't be your real name. Or it's also like when because I feel like when you hear like a very Asian last name, you're like, oh, you're a fob. You know what I mean? Or like if somebody has grown up around the accent and they kind of speak a little with the accent because that's how their parents talk to them, you're like, oh, you're a fob. Whereas like for example, like my boyfriend, let's call him Bob.
Bob.
Yeah. So
Guys, Bob.
Bob.
Sorry, we'll take that out.
Okay. So this person that I know, calling him Bob, he doesn't speak with an accent. He speaks very like good English, you know. So you would have never guessed that he wasn't born like in this country, you know, and that's crazy to me because there are some people that are born in this country that I'm like, oh, you are, and that is in like that's something that's my fault. I shouldn't assume that, but you know what I mean? Like that's something that I'm like always watching out for, or like when we try to guess what kind of Asian someone is, I feel like that's very prevalent in like our community. I'm always like, oh, that person's Filipino. Oh, that person's probably this, and it's because of the implicit bias of like, oh, you look like this, so you have to be this. You know what I mean?
You know what that reminds me of? It's not to do with like Asians, but I like I feel so terrible every time I do this, but recently I've been making mistakes like with people's pronouns. I've been calling people like she, her when they're like a they, them, and I feel so bad about it afterwards. I've been trying to always use they, them when I can, but I don't know. Sometimes it just like accidentally comes out.
Yeah, that's a hard one. Oh man.
I don't know. I don't know. I think it's kind of weird because, okay, in terms of implicit, biases and how it's affected my life, I won't know. I don't think I always notice it.
Mm-hmm.
Like I really genuinely may not always notice it. And it like this is like coming from both sides, like me receiving and then me giving, said implicit biases. I don't always notice it. But I think yeah, I don't know. I honestly can't. It's hard to think of it how it's affected my life on a daily basis.
Mm-hmm.
Because I feel like if you get so much implicit bias at some point, you won't notice. Like, let's say people stare at you. So this is happened in California. It hasn't happened recently in Purdue because I'm on a college campus, but in California, this happened a lot, where it wasn't implicit bias. It was implicit bias affecting an action. So over the summer, I had really long hair. I had really long hair. I was, I had I was really tan. And basically I didn't look like a very stereotypical Asian. And this was like the most apparent to me when I went to a park and I went to go skate. And you don't see Asians skate. You don't see a long-haired Asian kid skate, and you don't see a long-haired Asian tan kid skate. Like every grandma in like Irvine is the place where I was coming from, or where I was. Irvine, is a huge Asian population, and so when I went there, there were these grandmas and grandpas. Of course, I was skating towards them, so they're probably just making sure that I was okay, like I wouldn't hit them. But I was like pretty far off the road, like I wasn't even near them. They would keep staring at me, right? And I think that's part of like implicit differentiation, implicit bias, where they wouldn't think that I'm, they see me. And then, they think, oh, and maybe this is a little differentiation on my end, where I believe that these grandpas and grandmas are way more traditional. So I think that they're judging me when in reality, so like it goes back and forth. I think it's kind of an interesting, I don't know if this is like this isn't a daily life, but it did happen a lot when I was back in California for the summer. And so on one hand, they were staring at me and I knew they were staring at me. So they could be thinking that I'm kind of a bum kid. Right.
Yeah.
But I won't lie, my GPA isn't great. But I think I'm studying like decent, a little bit more on the traditional Asian side of like econ, and then studying math as well. These two are basically like kind of like borderline stereotypes for our specific race. But on the other hand, I was projecting onto them my implicit differentiation, implicit biases, because I saw them as, very traditional folk who would not approve of me. When in reality, I really don't know if they would approve of me or not. And I don't know and I have no idea and I don't know if they're judging me. And if they are judging me, I don't know what they're judging me on.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a bunch load of different things. And I think it's really interesting to see how implicit differentiation, implicit biases, God, affects
Implicit
both sides of the party.
differentiation.
Because like as you stereotype them, that they're stereotyping you, it gets really molded, and it's a really interesting concept,
Mm-hmm.
you know. And if it affects you in so many ways, and like, you know, I don't know. I feel like the only natural question, and it's the next one on the list,
Right.
like luckily, is basically like, is it so bad?
Mm-hmm.
Is it, if you do it so often, if you project on others and people would project on you, is it inherently bad? Because, you know, most stereotypes, when you see them, they're just like, oh my God, stereotypes? Why? But, you know.
See, that's also a really good question, because like for me, I feel like there are some stereotypes, at least relating to like the Asian culture, that relate to me personally, that I feel like I fall into. So I'm sitting here like, yes, it is a stereotype because it generalizes the entire Asian population. Whew, it's so spicy.
Yes, we were eating hot ramen at the same time. So you see us go.
Yeah, like it's weird because I fall into these stereotypes. I'm sitting here like, are they inherently bad? Because in my opinion, I feel like I've benefited off of some of these. You know, people expect more out of me, right? And so I push myself to meet those expectations, which I feel like I guess some people would argue it's not a good mentality to have to hold yourself to these kinds of expectations. But I feel like that in itself has helped me to succeed. You know, people expect more out of me, so I put more into what I put more into it.
I'm gonna disagree with you on that one. I'm gonna say that like the holding the Asians to high expectations thing is just always gonna be like not great.
Yeah, I think it can be like, you know, it can be one or the other, because some people will either like they'll either meet it or they'll fail. You know what I mean? And that's not a good thing. Like you yourself should be holding yourself to expectations that you make for yourself. I said yourself a lot in that sentence. But you know what I mean? Like, I understand that, you know, we should never, ever hold somebody else to some kind of expectation. But I feel like, personally, I can't say that all implicit biases or all stereotypes have affected me negatively, because I can very clearly say that some of them have helped me shift the mentality in my own head to propel myself into success, you know?
Okay, this is like weird because I know I've seen Gwen's side of you, like things.
Yeah.
Easily by far, there is so many things that like I can list one off the top of my head right now of like an implicit bias / stereotype that actually like helped me like help me succeed in a class. Yeah. But I'm well aware that when I look back on it, it was terrible. So
okay,
like and like so I agree with Jack, but I relate to Gwen.
Yeah, okay. So I see what I'm saying also is that I also kind of agree with you, because like I know how it has affected me personally. Like I know what it's done for me in the long run, because now I hold myself to this standard. But that standard in itself has been something that has always made me feel not enough. You know what I mean? So yes, it is really bad, but like there can be good. You know what I mean? Like that, I feel like the example that I used was really bad, but
yeah,
you know what I mean? Like there can be good. I feel like I should find an example.
Oh, I'll give an example. And basically what happens here is that like the stereotype becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Okay. In sixth grade, I was, you know, just chilling, hanging out, you know, in math class, you know, and then we're just, you know, everyone's doing these problems. For whatever reason, you know, math in sixth grade is not a terribly difficult thing. So I understood it pretty quickly. Mm-hmm. And I want to say it was accumulation of a lot of things. You know, maybe it was my parents' background and wanting to push me in math. It was the fact that I already went to tutoring sometimes. It was a whole aspect of, you know, different, you know, jumbles of variables, I'm sure, whatever the case may be. But I understood a lot of the concepts already. And so this like white kid turns around. He's asking a bunch of different people, and then, you know, he kind of he turns towards me. He's like, "Do you understand this?" I'm like, "Yeah. It's just like this, and that." Mm-hmm. You know, and he's like, "Oh my God, you get it?" I'm like, "Yeah. It's not that hard." And then he's like, "Oh my God, is it because you're Asian?" And then that was a moment where it's like, And I was like,
Classic.
and I'm like, I don't know, you're like 11, you don't really know how to respond to that. And so a lot of kids, it sucks it sucks, but like a lot of kids tend to give in to that kind of like stereotype to please the white people.
Yeah.
Where, they're like, oh yeah, like, and I did like, and I feel really bad about this, but like, I did make fun of my race a little bit. But this is where it gets bad. I regret, absolutely regret, stereotyping my race and becoming the Asian math kid, because I wasn't good because I was Asian. I was good because I was pushed to be better at every subject that I like was put in. Yeah. Right. Of course, it doesn't always stand now, but but like the other thing is that like, it's like, on one hand, yeah, it's a terrible thing. And once I look back on it, I would definitely smack my younger self in the back of the head and be like, don't give in to whatever they're saying. Yeah. Do be good at math, but be whatever. But then at the same time, because I was stereotyped to be better, I eventually I pushed myself, and I remember pushing myself a little harder than normal to understand what was happening so I could explain to the people around me, just so I could keep up that like image, even though I understood the like stuff pretty well anyways. Right. So in that sense, a stereotype didn't exactly help me. Like the motivation was corrupt, but the result was good. Yeah. See, that's why like this is a weird question, because in my opinion, what you put out there, like without the intention behind it, nothing can ever really be inherently bad. Like all these things, they're just words, they're just descriptive things. It's just the motivation and the intent that you have behind it is what makes these implicit biases like not good, and it's like, it's weird because I understand the idea of falling into that and like scolding yourself, like your younger self. Currently, if I was me, I would be like, oh yes, don't fall into that stereotype, don't put yourself into this box, don't limit yourself to only this, because that has been something that like I felt like I've dealt with a lot, where I just put myself in this box where I'm like, I'm this Asian, I need to do this the way that people have always seen it, to keep face, things like that. But I feel like it's also like in my own siblings and in like my own life, I feel like growing up, I have learned to get to gain pride for the Asian culture, or for Asians, because of these stereotypes, like, yeah, I understand these standards are really bad, but they also make us sometimes look good. It's just, it sucks if we can't meet them, because we should be the ones setting them. You know what I mean? It's just like, you understand what I mean? The intention behind it makes the bias bad, not the bias, not the actual descriptors themselves, I would say, Jack, did you want to say something?
I just don't know that I understand what you're saying, because it's like, I think that there's definitely, people can have biases that are just inherently negative, like thinking something about someone that is just not true. Like, I don't know.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Like these are just descriptor terms. It's like curse words, they're not inherently bad. They're just, it's the way that you use them. If you use if you use this in a way that is offensive to someone, or you're using it in a way to, because like it's subconscious, right? If you subconsciously are assuming these negative things about people, or like maybe you don't even think they're negative, but they would be negative because they're wrong about someone, then yeah, that in itself is bad. But if these implicit biases are like not bad, if you're assuming things about people that are not like, they're actually okay, you know what I mean?
I think I get. Okay, I'll translate. I think I can translate for one. I think I can translate for one.
Speaking another language.
Because I both agree and disagree with you. Okay. So you're basically saying that your implicit bias are only bad if you choose to act on them. If it's affecting your actions. Your implicit bias aren't bad if it doesn't show. Essentially.
Okay.
But I would agree to a degree. I would agree to a T, and say that yes, your implicit bias are never as bad as the ones you act on. Okay. But I would also say that like they're not inherently evil. They can be bad, but the explanation for why they are the way they are is way more imperative than than actually having them. So when you get like it, when you have an implicit bias, it doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from somewhere. So it's not bad because you have it.
Yes.
It's bad because you either act on it or you never choose to change it.
Yeah, that's I think that is a good way to put like what I was trying to say. It's like, because I was thinking about it and I was like, maybe I'm wrong about saying that, but then I thought about it like the way that Calvin was saying it, and yeah, I think that is what I mean, because like part of this question is, can implicit bias be fixed? And if it's so subconscious, you know how like there's like that study where people say that your first initial thought is never actually what you think. It's something that your brain is still trying to process, that it has heard or it has like been exposed to, right? And it's still processing that kind of information. So your initial thought, random thought that you don't even think like that you don't even feel like you could have that kind of thought, is not really yours. It's how you choose to respond to it or how you react to that thought, that like that's how you really feel about it, you know? So if you yourself internalize that implicit bias and you're like, oh yes, that person is that, I will just make that in my head a fact, then that's when I feel like implicit bias is bad. So I don't think it's inherently bad. I think what you choose to do with it is bad because it's something so subconscious. Like, we can't say that something that happens to almost everyone, like subconsciously, is just bad. Because how do you stop something in like a mechanism that no one understands? You know, how do you stop something that no one can understand? Because it's not something that you can understand. So how can you even say that it's good or bad?
But like when it becomes something past something in your subconscious, like if you do choose to act on it, then is it even an implicit bias anymore?
Okay, I would love to hear like Jack's take on like is it implicit bias bad as it enters the conscious world?
Yeah.
Well, I guess that just kind of depends on what the bias is, right?
I feel like once you become conscious of it, you can't sit here and say that it's like, because if you choose not to change your own implicit biases, I feel like it's once you become conscious that you have implicit biases, you're able to.
It's no longer implicit.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's no longer implicit. So you have to do something about it so that if it ever does happen, then you don't have a bias. Oh, man.
Yeah, I think that's pretty interesting.
That's a good point. So I guess if we choose to do something about it, then it stops being implicit. So then would it definitely have to be bad? But then it also comes to the point, like, how do you even get your own implicit biases? They have to come from somewhere, right? Like, you can't, like, if a child just randomly, like, when they grow older, they start getting implicit biases. Can we say that those are inherently bad when they weren't the ones that like created them? They didn't have any poor intentions towards them. You know what I'm saying? Because like as a child, you learn things, right? You're learning everything about the world around you. It's about the people that are like showing you, and you don't know. So you cannot say that these biases are bad. They're just stating what they might think, that what they know of the world. So then are their assumptions also bad? Are these biases, you know what I mean? Like, is it only bad when you're older because it's subconscious, like something that you have accumulated over time? Because, you know, I feel like thinking as a child, if I was a child and I saw someone that I was unfamiliar with and I wanted to know more about it, but I didn't know how to express or like ask the questions that I wanted to ask, I would be very blunt and say just what I see, right? I would just say what I see. And if that is an implicit bias, is it bad for me to say it or assume it as a child? You know,
I don't think the ability to gain implicit biases is inherently evil. The process in which you gain implicit bias is not inherently evil because it's completely out of your control.
Mm-hmm.
That part's not evil. The actual implicit bias, I think, can go both ways. It can either be a good thing or a bad thing.
Yeah.
You know, let's say you see a person with carrying a baby. You're probably going to automatically assume that they're a good person because they're carrying a baby. You know.
Whoa.
But no. I know.
It's kind of true though.
Well, maybe. What if like this person? I mean, like, yeah, like, but that doesn't always mean that there's a bad thing. But that's an implicit bias that can be a good thing, right? You feel safe with this person who's carrying a baby, right? But on the other hand, like there's obviously like very bad implicit biases.
Yeah.
Let's say you, I
Assuming
don't know,
race.
you go in an elevator, you see like this is like you see
Yeah.
an African American, and then you just like clutch your bag tighter.
Yeah.
That is bad.
That is
So you
bad.
have your good and your bads, right? But the process in which you gain it, I don't think is inherently evil because it's completely out of your control.
Yeah.
The process in which you change it or you
Yeah.
project it depends is I think another gray area.
Yeah.
Because this is another question that we eventually have to go through, and I don't know if we're ready. I don't know, Jack. You could definitely like. I want to hear your opinions on this too as well. But how can we keep ourselves from gaining new implicit bias in the process of fixing it, or how can we, and if we so choose to ignore it, is that a change in itself? And when you try to fix your implicit biases, are they still implicit? There's a lot of like, a lot of like gray area to this one. So that I think, okay, just to summarize, I think the process of intaking implicit bias is not a bad thing. It's out of your control.
Yeah.
You can't do anything. It's an explanation, but it's not an excuse, right?
Yeah.
Then you have the actual implicit bias in your daily life when you're older and you're actually, doing it. In some moments you'll project it. You won't notice it, but you'll project it. That in itself is bad and or good depending on what happens. Where it becomes truly gray for me is when you find out that you have implicit bias. It's no longer implicit bias. So you do what you can to either change it or ignore it.
Mm-hmm.
So can you change your implicit biases then?
Okay, well, I think so. The idea of implicit bias is that it is subconscious, right? So when you're conscious of it, it's no longer implicit. So you are 100% just biased, right? And then what you choose to do with it is up to you. So going into the whole like changing it, it's all about like changing it is acquiring new ones. And I feel like with more knowledge, you can either be very careful in your assumptions. I feel like implicit bias is something that you will 100% not be able to avoid. Like it will always be something that because like even if you learn more information about someone and you don't choose to act on it, you will always try, like there will be an assumption based on new information. You know what I mean? Like it might not even be wrong. It might be a right assumption. It's still an implicit bias, just because it's correct doesn't make it any less of an implicit bias, which is why I think like yes, you can change it, but in that sense, it's more of like it's educated and it's like an implicit bias that like, I don't know, does that make it not an implicit bias anymore? Am I using the word wrong? Am I just dumb?
I'm gonna argue on Jack on this that you cannot change your implicit biases.
Really?
Because your implicit biases are consistently subconscious, right? If you do something, subconsciously, it's like going back to the conversation, like that example you brought up, where implicit bias is unconscious, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's always that first thought, that instinct of fight or flight, stereotype, not stereotype, blah blah blah. That first instinctual thought, the one that doesn't even have words to it. It's just a feeling. That is your implicit bias.
That's true.
And then, but to fix it, and I use quotes fix it because it's no longer implicit, it's no longer subconscious, is your conscious second thought that follows.
Okay.
If I see, like, let's say I met you for the first time, I see you and I'm like, oh, she's tiny, she's probably weak and stuff. That is the immediate thought.
Mm-hmm.
But then Jack's laughing because
it's funny because that probably is what you think every time you see Gwen then.
Yeah, but
that's your implicit bias by what you're saying.
Awful.
But the second thought immediately after is you realize that like you're not a tiny human being. You're literally 20 years old. You pay for your own stuff. You are an adult. You know, you're like it's
I'm
like
the
it's
example.
it's like yes, I'm gonna use you as the example because you know it's like but like I think your ability to like I could go like do you want me to go on a rant just to compliment you because like that's
Just go ahead.
no, but like the concept is basically like your first thought
Mhm.
is your implicit bias. You'll never be able to properly change that. You know, to a degree you can, but I think the real change comes from the second thought. You know, the one that though comes after, and I think it's really prevalent in like. Actually, I'll go into this later. I'm talking a lot.
Okay, so well, you know what I just realized? It's really interesting that you brought up like the whole like age thing because like when people think implicit bias, you think race, right? So I feel like a lot of people work on changing implicit biases on race, but what they don't realize is that still in everyday life, there's still ageism. There's still like it's not just colorism there, right? It's ageism. It's like there's also like the sexism. There are gender roles that come into play. Like guys are still held to certain standards that they shouldn't be held to. You know, girls are also expected to act a certain way in certain cultures and certain like areas. You know what I mean? So it's like you change one thing, but I feel like if you change that, then you also have to try to work to change everything else, which I guess is human nature. You're just constantly supposed to be growing and become the best person that you can be. But it's just like, is it so much that it's just impossible? Because then you'll always develop new implicit biases. So like, is it impossible to be bias free?
Is it even worth it?
Oh, definitely. Yeah. I think that we're always having these biases no matter what. Even if it's like for better or for worse, they're always there. And I don't think you can ever get rid of them, but you can replace them with like more correct thoughts, I guess.
I think more open-mindedness.
Okay. Well, I feel like we talked a lot about that. So I guess my second part to this question was, is it better to admit that you have these implicit biases, or like is it better to admit to yourself like what they are? You know,
Well,
is it better to make them unconscious or like not unconscious? Not unconscious.
Well,
Is it better to make them conscious?
And that
Yeah.
feels like that's the only way that you'll ever be able to kind of move on from those from like the negative biases at least. It's kind of like the first step is just like
Yeah.
knowing what your biases are. And then from there, I think you can try to fix them, right?
I felt like I think I included this question because I wanted to make it like clear that we all felt the same way about this, just in case someone was like, well, there's so many. Why should I just admit them? Why should I just continue to be oblivious? You know, which obviously the most correct answer is always to just admit it, right? Like everyone always has to admit like when they're at fault or when they're thinking like not words not flowing.
I agree. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think what was the question? Is it better to admit your
Yeah.
implicit biases and is it better to do all that?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I think it's good to admit it. I don't think it really changes the fact that it's still a subconscious thought and slash instinct slash attitude slash whatever it may be. I don't know if it really changes that, but it starts the process to change. So it's basically I basically said what Jack said. You know, yeah, you got to admit it to like you have to admit it at some point, right? When this is a school project.
I'm so
please.
sorry. I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay,
Continue.
Oh, were you gonna end it?
No, I was gonna go to the next question, but you have more to say.
No, that's basically it. I mean, I kind of want to kind of shift back to like how it has affected all of us, though. So,
Right.
I mean, with the next question, I hope that.
Okay. Oh, sorry, just plugged my charger. So, okay. So the next question that we should ask, I guess, is how has implicit bias or stereotypes affected each of us? So we just,
That's perfect.
yeah, we could just go down the line. That's actually number 3 right there. So
Wait, didn't we already do
sort
that?
of talked about.
yeah, we sort of did, but now that we finally like officially define like implicit bias, we've like described stereotypes. How do we think now, looking back on our own lives, how has that affected you personally? You know, because now that we've decided that implicit bias is something that we encounter every day now that we've had more time to think about more examples, all that stuff. What have you noticed? What have you felt? Has it had any positive impacts, negative impacts? Probably more negative than positive, to be honest, for me in my case. Oh, I since I started, I can go.
No, that's just the awkward pause. Good.
That's how we do it.
Yes, get it.
So I guess if I was starting, like, I guess how it's affected me was it's made me question my own identity. You know what I mean? I feel like it's caused me to go into multiple identity crises.
In the past hour?
Not in the past hour, but like over the course of like my life, I feel like they're not like, oh, midlife crises, but they're like pretty I feel like knowing your identity, this is something that I've talked about since I work for the cultural center right here. So like talking with people, I have learned that knowing your identity is so important in doing everything that you have, right? And everything that you do. Because it's like, if you don't know who you are, you won't know what you want out of a job. You won't know what you want out of life, out of a relationship, all this stuff. And like, for me, I feel like these biases and these stereotypes have held me to a standard that I could never ever meet. So I was always like, I'm always confused as to who I am and what I want to do now, because I don't know, do I want to fall into the stereotypes? Do they benefit me? Like, it's just a lot of like thoughts racing because I'm always so aware of it now that, you know, we've talked about a lot of this, but you know what I'm saying? Like for me, I feel like it's caused not just negative impacts, but it's also helped me be a little more introspective because then I'm more self-conscious, you know?
I think for me, I gotta say that I agree with Gwen that it gives me a bit of an identity crisis. And it's not because this is like the first time. I've already dealt with a version of like this before. I think the best example I can give is, and this is gonna make me sound like a terrible person, but like someone has called me out on using the B word a little bit more. Like, I don't want to say.
Oh, don't say it. Don't say
it. Project, but like, no, I'm not gonna. But like, it's a word that can be misconstrued as a bit more misogynistic in recent times. Are you serious? It took you that long to figure out? It's the B word.
I was sitting here thinking, like, that it's because
beach ball.
I have not heard it used in that. I've never
bungalow.
I feel like people just say it now. You know, like I haven't heard it be referred to as the B word in a long time.
One of my more
one
of my more progressive friends had called me out on it and basically said that you can't be using those words. You can't. They said I use those words a bit more misogynistically, and I've been trying to change that. I have been trying to change that. I think what's given me a more of identity crisis is whenever I do a certain thing or act a certain way or say a certain thing, right? Like, I don't know if it's an implicit bias or I'm just a terrible person, or it like I try to change it, right?
Right.
You know, like it's a thing that's really hard to change.
Yeah. And
I think it's borderline impossible to change all your implicit biases. Yeah. I actually don't think I think it's worth it to try your best. I don't think it's worth it to get 100%. You know, because you're just gonna get caught in this. Yeah, you're gonna get in this caught in this like pretty solid conundrum of back and forth, you know, am I this, am I that, am I this, am I that, or who is that, who is this? So I mean, like, I think so, like, in terms of how it has affected me, like based on this conversation, I think you just got to realize that as much as you have implicit biases, you got to understand that not all of them will sit well in today's society, and you just got to keep an open mind. And an open mind, quite literally, almost consistently, means saying, "Oh man, yeah, I'm wrong. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I will attempt to fix it, but you got to not do everything. I think you got to do the best you can."
Well, I think that, so my background coming from I went to the most diverse high school in Chicago, and like even growing up, my middle school was super diverse. I try like I try so hard to be as like as unbiased as possible whenever I speak. Like I really try to not offend anybody. And because I just feel so guilty when I do. I feel so terrible about it.
Me all the time.
What?
Just kidding.
So I feel like I definitely find myself like, I don't know, avoiding saying certain things, or I don't know. I just find myself being very careful sometimes. And I feel like that,
Sorry.
what?
No, go ahead.
I don't know. I just feel like that's the best thing I can do for myself, at least.
Yeah, I mean, like, I think that's I mean, that's what I was trying
Yeah.
to say, essentially, like, be careful and, like, try your best. I mean, I just okay, what I was trying to say is, like, I wouldn't beat myself up over slipping up a few times because you're still human.
Right.
And this isn't me particular, this is like everyone, like,
Mm-hmm.
but you should actively try to stop, be as careful as
Mm-hmm.
possible. Don't like die over the fact that you slipped up a few times, but
Mhm.
actively trying, and actively trying also means probably apologizing sometimes.
Yeah.
When you don't want to, not need to, you don't want to.
Mm-hmm.
So, and sometimes it just means like, knowing that you know, just the fact that you felt bad is more than most people sometimes.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Okay. I think I did better.
Okay. So here's another question. How would you handle witnessing implicit bias?
Straight up.
Like what do you do if you notice it? How do you even notice it to begin with? If it's so prevalent in society and like the world that we are now, how are you even able to like say that's implicit bias? That right there. That. You know what I mean?
It's interesting because I feel like I see it a lot. Like but I feel like I'm the kind of person that would not call people out on it at all. And I feel bad about it sometimes, but also I feel like it kind of comes back to what we were saying earlier, where it's so hard to change people's thoughts, where it just kind of feels sometimes like, oh, is it even worth it to bring it up to them? Or, is it worth my time?
That's true. I mean, I feel like I can't really say one or the other because I'm very one or the other. It really depends on the situation for me. Like, yeah, it's always like pick your battles, but it's like if you don't know this person, should you pick the battle or should you, I guess, not pick the battle? I don't know the opposite to that. I'm not good with this.
I would say I feel
The awkward
I,
pause.
okay. Jack and I are, I think, a bit more on the. I'm more on the opposite spectrum on Jack's side because I don't think I always notice it, or at least if I. And that I know that sounds terrible, but I think the thing for me is not if you notice it, what will you do, but how do you best notice it? What are not dead giveaways, but what are like. What are things that you can like, how
Right.
can you notice it? I think that's the hardest part for me is not necessarily,
Yeah.
oh my God, you shouldn't have said that. It's like, oh, yeah, you should like.
Oh, it's very after the fact kind of thing.
It's a little bit like I think I'm slow.
Okay.
I think I'm
So
slow.
let's say you do notice it in the moment. What would you do?
It depends on how bad it is.
So you like even.
Oh no! I take it back. I think knowing me, I would sarcastically say something.
I see.
Just to like make my point across. Like if someone said something like a bit more on the misogynistic side, I think I dropped like, hey man, you can't say that anymore.
I'm gonna be honest here. I am also similar on. I'm on Jack's. I'm leaning towards Jack's because that's just who I am as a person. But it's not because like it's less of like, oh, I feel bad. I know I should say something, but it's really like difficult for me too. It's more like I'm a terrible person. Is what I'm trying to say. Like I don't want to say that because that makes you sound bad, but I want to be honest. And if I'm being honest, the reason that I wouldn't approach or I wouldn't do anything is because, well, what do I do? What do I say? You know, like how do I, like, even if I approach, right? And I feel like that's maybe part of what you were trying to say, Jack, but also it's like, for me, like, it's less that I'm scared. It's more like, if I try to argue with you, like, what do I get out of it? Which is a terrible thing to say, because you shouldn't try to get anything out of all of these stuff, all of these things. I'm just saying, if it happened in the moment, initially, my initial instinct would be, why do I need to say something? It's not happening to me. And that is something obviously that I'm trying to change currently because I'm aware of it. But it's like currently that is how my body and my brain would respond.
Yeah, I'm definitely on the more. I am 100% more on the like confrontational, aggressive side of things. I
Yeah.
think between like the three of us, I would say I'm a bit more like I don't mind confrontation. I know we've talked about this before as like personal friend groups.
Yeah.
But in terms of confrontation, I think I'm the best when it comes to just complete strangers or like just friends alone. You know, I don't know. I mean, Jack's also pretty blunt, but I think Jack's blunt.
Yeah.
Jack's blunt with us.
Yeah. I would say that you, Jack, are more of the, like, two strangers, you wouldn't say anything. I'm more like half-half. I might be able to, but that really depends on how bad it was. Like, if it made me mad enough to be like, whoa, you need to stop, all right? Or if, in my opinion, it was like, oh, like, I noticed it, but I don't think it's harmful enough. That, to me, I should stop it. I feel like I should stop it anyways. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
If I notice it, because I feel like I notice it. I just choose not to say anything, which I know is worse.
I think it's circumstantial for me. If it's my friends, I will definitely say something. If it's a stranger and they're just on the side of the street and they're saying stupid stuff, then you know it. Yeah. I mean, there's always ways to fix it, right? Like, right. But for the most part, I would say that if it's my friends, I would generally say something. If it's not my friends, I most likely will not, unless it's like that bad. Like unless they go up to me like, "Do you speak English?" I'm like, "Hey man, I do not. I do not speak English.
Not
I'm
at
so
all,
sorry."
So,
I don't know. That's me. That's me. I would confront my friends. But
okay.
I don't know. I think the biggest question for me is still like I don't even know how to notice it all the time. Unless it's like completely backhanded me in the face. Implicit bias is kind of a weird thing because as subconscious as it is projecting, it's also as like subconscious as it is absorbing. You know?
Yeah.
You take so many implicit like bias judgments in a day that at some point you, and this sounds you know genuinely terrible, but you become numb to it. Yeah. Because it's just how society works.
Yeah, it's like desensitization, you know?
Yeah. You eventually just kind of like, you know, you build like, and I think like a lot of minorities tend to deal with this, especially, you know, like, and especially like, you know, coming from like 3 Asians who have dealt with like certain things. Like when my friends, like when, not my friends, when those guys had asked me like, do you speak English? I never end up getting offended. I think I become more along the lines of like, I chuckle and then it's like, yeah, I do speak English, man. Yeah, I am born here. It's gotten to the point of not, it's you know, it's interesting to say that, you know, if you notice it, should you say something? But for me, honestly, the bigger question is like, how do you even notice it if you've built up such a tolerance?
I'm gonna let you handle that one, Jack. How do you notice it? Like, how do you think you can even begin to notice these things?
I don't know. It seems like maybe just putting yourself around different kinds of people is the best way to kind of figure out maybe what your like different perspectives that you might not have experienced before, you know? Like I feel like a lot of the issue with people who are like implicitly biased towards like gay people or people who are, you know, not the same race as them is that they just never like really spend the time with these people, or they never like have met these people, and they don't realize that, you know, they're just people too.
Yeah, I feel like for me it's like watching like reading literature from people of like those social groups, or like watching movies and films that they have produced, you know what I mean? Because I read this book, or like part of this book. I read a lot of this book.
A solid 2 chapters from this book.
I read most of this book called Shush, called Minor Feelings by Kathy Parkham, right? And that is something like if I recommend it. I think it's a really great narrative of like Asian American like life, and like reading that, it makes it, I think that in itself, like I was very, like Calvin said, numb to it. I didn't notice it. It was just something that I was never offended by, because if I let it get to me, I wouldn't be where I am today. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
So it's just like when I read that this year, it just kind of, that's when I noticed a lot of the implicit biases, because then you're like, oh, this is not the way that the world is supposed to work. This is not how it's supposed to be. And it's crazy because in that book, I feel like I noticed a lot more of my own implicit biases towards people of my own race. You know what I mean?
Mm.
I have, and that's crazy, right? To think that you're part of the social group and yet you can still have implicit bias towards like something that you are a part of, you know? Like I got called out for it today, that, you know, people have noticed that I seem to be kind of, I have like biases towards not Asian Americans, but like my own racial group. Like I admit it 100%. Like people, as apparently people have noticed. I thought I was pretty like quiet about it, but no, not like quiet as in like, it's just like I am aware of it because it's something that I didn't think was going to be considered implicit bias. I literally just realized how like awful it is to, okay, not like how awful it is, but you know what I mean? Like I just, it's interesting for me to see that implicit bias occurs not just like across like cultures, it happens within the same culture.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
We talked about a little about
Yeah.
that before.
Yeah, we talked a little bit about it, but like bringing it up again and reading like this book, reading this literature, that's how you would notice it. And like it's crazy because it's not just like, oh, like the way that people act. It's also just like between family too, like within our own like parents. So in this book, they were talking about like the feeling of gratitude versus indebtedness. You know what I mean? I feel like I'll speak for myself only. I feel like I was always told that like I owed my life to my parents.
Mm.
You know what I mean?
agree with that.
Do you see what I mean?
I do know what you mean on that one.
Like I feel like they've always said like you should always be giving back to your family because like, you know, we owe them. They gave us all of this. And that's what I've heard so much in this Asian culture. Like with us, when we talk about our families, oh, we support them because, you know, they gave us everything. But is that gratitude, or is that you feeling indebted to them?
I don't know. I think that's a completely like cultural aspect. Like it's to like some. I talked to like my friend who's very white, or a while back he was a pretty white guy, American guy, whatever. And they definitely don't have the same cultural need to fulfill, like to help your community and your family and your parents as we do. It's like, it sounds terrible, right?
No,
because from another perspective, from another culture's view, they would think, why would you feel indebted to the parents? You know, you're supposed to do something like that. But like on our side, it's so normalized. I'm not even it's not even that bad of a thing. It's like, why wouldn't I want to help out my parents when, you know?
I mean that's the thing. That's the difference between the gratitude versus the indebtedness. Like I don't owe my life to you. I want to give you a lot of my life, right? And that's where the implicit bias is, right? Your family and you have inherited that bias of my children will owe me everything, which, like, you know what I mean? Like they give birth to you so that you can provide for them. Like, you know, like as soon as you come into this world, you're indebted to your parent for giving birth to you, which I think is like a crazy way to think about it, right? Because like, and I don't know if that's like the American way of thinking about it, or if that's just like, you know, is that like an implicit bias in itself? Is what I'm saying? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like that's like, I don't know, like it made me think about that, you know, because I noticed that. And then when I thought about this whole issue, because I feel like that book kind of got all up in here. So it's just, I don't even know if I had a question. I just wanted to bring that up.
No, but it definitely helps. You like learning about your different, like reading about literature, immersing yourself in a different like cultural background. I think definitely helps with identifying your own implicit biases and then learning to be more careful and learning
Yeah.
to be more open. It helps a lot.
Mhm.
I would also say that like just because you're numb to it doesn't always mean that you ignore it. You're numb to when it happens to you. You may not be so numb when you see it on someone else. I
Okay.
think it's probably the more interesting aspect. I keep saying that we're numb, but it's because I'm numb to when people do it to me. I
Right.
don't when it comes to me, I may not care as much. But
Okay.
let's say like this happened to one of you guys, or happened to like one of my friends, another one of my friends, or like my siblings, or my
Mhm.
family, or anything like that. It's not like I don't see it then. I will see it then, but like I think it's interesting to note that like your implicit biases, while you may be numb to them or you may not acknowledge them as much as you did before, it doesn't necessarily mean that you don't see it. You still
Mhm.
see it. I would say I think when you asked the question, I in my head had kind of gone through the idea like, oh wait, yeah. Um, if you see implicit bias in my head, I kind of like said in my like, just thought, oh, if I see implicit bias being projected onto me,
Right.
what will I do? I won't notice it,
Right.
but I won't always notice it. There like
Yeah.
I have to go through like a pretty large exposure to kind of like see it
Right.
sometimes. But I won't lie when I say like if I see it done to someone else, I won't it's not like I won't say anything or I won't notice it. Like what will you do
Right.
when that happens when it's done to someone else? I think it really is circumstantial at that point.
Right.
How loud is it? Is it really your business? Is it really not your business?
Mhm.
Is it affecting your friends? Is it affecting someone around you? And I think in that case, we're talking about how we're trying to be more open,
Right.
but we're trying to be more open because we're numb to it. But I want to say that I want to argue with the fact that like just because you're numb yet really does not discount the fact that you can't feel it. You
That's
can't
true.
see it. Maybe
Mhm.
we've gone through it so many times at this point that like
Yeah.
we can identify it so easily when it happens. And it depends on the certain like category of implicit bias, I would say. Do you have something to say to that, Jack? I feel like you're very contemplating very hard now.
Uh, Not really. I don't think I have very much to add on to that, I think.
Well, so here I guess is the last like official question, and then you guys can throw out any questions that you have. But here's probably like my last question before whatever. But so now talking about all of this, we're gonna get into like the personal. How what are your own implicit biases? How do you on your own terms? Now we're gonna look kind of bad for saying what these are, but I feel like
You're exposing us on your
yeah, I feel like
all your classmates have to say.
I think that it's important to address your own implicit biases. We literally just said that admitting it is the best thing to do. So now we're gonna admit it. I feel like I have admitted my implicit bias, so I'm done. I'm just
What? What? You don't get a jail free card because it's your project.
I'm joking.
Keep this in.
No, okay. So I can go first. Since obviously I suggested it, I'll give you guys some time to think. So I feel like I've thought about this a lot because I have been constantly on this journey of like self-improvement, right? Right? Yeah. I'll be honest here, right? I feel like I've been introspective for a little bit now. I've talked to a lot of people. I have been going consistently to like talk and like I don't know. I've been thinking a lot about this, right? So I feel like I am more aware of my own implicit biases. And now I know, like I feel like I've always known since I was younger that I have a lot of implicit biases towards my own culture. And that runs through my family. That's not just with me. And like, that's something that I need to work on, right? I have a lot of implicit biases towards like just like first look at people, like first impressions. You know what I'm saying? I have really I make really not bad assumptions, but I make assumptions. And I feel like that is something that I need to work on. Why are you looking at me like that, Jack?
I'm waiting to hear some specific examples, Gwen.
Oh, I was getting specific. Okay.
You brought this question. You made this question to expose us. You'll be taken down first.
Okay. Give me
Cancel
like,
Gwen. Cancel Gwen.
Cancel culture.
Oh my goodness. Well, okay. I feel like there is a lot of racism within our own culture, right? And so I try very hard to avoid any assumptions there. But I know that I still do make assumptions of like different types of Asian, or like I don't apologize for it. And that I know is bad. I'm working on it. I have a lot of pride, all right. I'm so sorry. But yes, so I feel like specific examples of some biases that I have towards my own culture, I'll expose myself here.
Wait, you don't have to be too specific.
No, I won't be too specific.
I just want to go. I feel like you're either gonna go really deep or really not that deep. And I just want you to know there's a middle ground.
There's a middle.
Don't hurt yourself in this.
No,
class,
no, I won't. But definitely one of the biases that I have towards like Filipino people specifically is that I associate them very heavily with negativity and drama, like 100%.
Yeah, I feel that.
That's an implicit bias. That's like, and that's something that like, this is why I know it's implicit, because when me and my family, I guess not me and my family, just like when I think about Filipino people sometimes, or like generally, I'm like, ooh, I don't know if I want to like get to know them. You know, I automatically have negative feelings within me when I first meet Filipino people, which I think is crazy because almost all my friends here are Filipino, right? But that doesn't mean that I didn't feel uncomfortable, like very uncomfortable when I first met them. And that is my own implicit bias because of the experiences that I've had and like the way that I grew up, you know, and it's like different groups. I know that there are implicit biases between the different groups in the Philippines. Now, I have not been able to develop those because I moved here when I was 2. So Filipinos are still Filipinos, but I will 100% tell you that when I first meet any kind of Filipino, I'm very uncomfortable around them. Like I'm very nice, but I'm very uncomfortable. And that is my implicit bias.
That's interesting. That's really interesting because I feel like for me, it's almost the exact opposite. Like if I'm like in a room and like I'm meeting people and there's like one Filipino guy, I'm going to be like, all right, I'm sticking with this guy because I know that I like him because he's Filipino and I'm Filipino.
I feel like because I grew up on the border of Mexico, I'm more drawn to like people of color, right? Just generally. You know what I mean? So that's who I would gravitate towards. If I saw a Filipino person in the room, here's another implicit bias. I would assume that they would be the loudest person in that room. I'm gonna be implicitly biased here, and that is why I would avoid it.
It's funny because like our friend group is generally the loudest.
I'm very loud. I am one of the loudest people in the room, but that is why I would avoid it, because when I first meet people, I don't like to be loud.
Okay. All right.
That's my implicit bias.
Okay.
Your turn. I'm so
You
sorry.
first,
I don't want to
Jack.
offend anyone.
You
I'm
first
so
or
sorry.
me, Jack?
You first.
I didn't sign up for this.
I do know one off the top of my head that I've attempted to fix for quite a while now, and I don't think I think I've been. I don't know how successful. I think I'm as successful as one can be, not as they like. You know, I think I'm trying my best, essentially, and it's related more to misogyny.
Mm-hmm.
So in a lot of Asian cultures, the women are generally not. The man of the household is exactly what it sounds like, the man. And it's funny because as you know, when I was growing older and I went to a pretty progressive high school in California, you know, obviously you have very contradicting beliefs. And one that I was very taken with, the one that I think I found the most interest in is probably feminism.
or well, not the most interest, but I did find a lot of interest in is feminism. Top like really, really cool topic all around. And it's interesting because I've been told I have a very condescending voice. And so I think it can be a little, I don't know if it's worse because, I've been told that sometimes it could be a little worse around women. I've been told. And like it's also, you if you're around a bunch of guys tend to say a bunch of stupid things regarding misogyny. And especially when you're raised in a culture, my family is pretty good about it, but like when you're raised in a culture where you're supposed to, where the eldest son is valued over the daughter, when the father is valued, as the man of the household, you have a lot of these bias. But then on the other hand, when you look at feminism, you understand how powerful, like, how great, how much better usually the other gender is. I mean, just generally, like, I this is a lot more organized. So I think I don't know how to describe it, but I think the best example I can give when I talk about like this is like a contradictory kind of thing. I don't know how good of an example. You can tell me you need a better example after this. But like basically like, I'll use the example like where I before I used that word, the B word, like, on perceived as more, more sexist. And I feel really guilty about that. I try to change that.
Right.
And so that's where a little of my misogyny kind of comes in, where I don't know if it's always well, I won't always know it, but I'm actively trying to fix it.
Right.
And it's really interesting because it's not just, I don't just like, I don't just, how do I say it? It's interesting because I actively do try to, or not actively try to, but life around me has actively shown that, it's, like it doesn't matter what gender you are. You can, sometimes it doesn't matter what gender you are, but you should still be like being feminist is a really good thing.
Mm-hmm.
Like I think like climbing, the sport of climbing is something that I've gotten really into and I've really enjoyed. But the funny thing is, as much as it is a male dominated sports, I climbed with predominantly women for the first year or so. And it's really interesting to see that, like, just, you have your implicit bias where you think that they're weaker. You see a woman, you just automatically think they're weaker. But I know the gals that I like climb with, they're significantly stronger than me. Mm-hmm. And they could they'll crush me like in like 2 seconds. It's insane. These are like great climbers all around, like, and they have like such grace and technique and like everything they do. And so it's kind of interesting to see that, like, as a guy, you think that you'd be the stronger climber, but then, you see these like women and they just completely like dominate the field and just make climbing look like a dance on the wall. So I think that's probably one of my more prominent like implicit biases that I've been actively trying to fix. And I don't know if you can hear. Can you hear the toothbrush going off? Sorry.
It's okay.
But I think that's one of my more implicit biases that I've been trying to fix for a good couple of years now.
Yeah.
And I don't think I'll ever be truly done with.
Right.
Just the idea that, you see a woman, you want to like help them because you're a guy, and it's a stupid way of being. You think they're weak, they're feeble, but they're really not. They're probably strong, if not stronger than you are. And and I think like climbing, I'm thinking of examples off the top of my head, but I can think of way more. Mm-hmm. Your mom is like an insanely strong woman. Your sister my sister has to deal with like 3 boys, for siblings, and I honestly, she's probably like the meanest out of all of us. So I don't know. It's really funny. So I think that's one of the implicit bias that I actively try to fix. Is that a good enough example?
Yeah, that's good. That's good. I like that one. All right, Jack, you're up.
I'm having a hard time coming up with something.
Wow.
So you don't have one?
I'm kind of like
Oh.
Wow, Jack,
perfect, you
you're
know.
perfect.
So
I would like to also say that although I said that, and I sounded really mean when I said that, I am actively trying to remove that bias because I genuinely like I enjoy my culture. I enjoy the people in it. It's just like I have had such a hard time, like you know what I mean? Like I grew up genuinely just learning to dislike them. That has become my implicit bias. So I just wanted to put that out there. It's not that like I still feel like that sometimes, but I'm trying to work on it. So go ahead, Jack.
uh,
Oh, Jack, you're so
Wow.
good.
Wow, look at him. Look at him flexing on us, saying, "Oh, I don't have any implicit biases." Lies.
I mean, see, that's the hard part is I'm sure I have them, but they're just so implicit, you know, that I don't even
subconscious.
What-
know
okay.
that it's happening.
What is something that you want to change about yourself specifically, like your mindset? Because I feel like that is something that you can pull an implicit bias out of. So think in that direction. What's
Okay.
something you're actively working on for yourself?
I got it.
Oh, here we go.
I don't know if this feels weird to talk about, you know. It's very
It's
uncomfortable.
okay. I felt very uncomfortable with what you just did to me, but I think we lived. I don't know. If your class ridicules us, I'm gonna die.
Don't
I'm gonna
it's
get-
okay.
I'd be
We're all
so
gonna-
sad.
It's been an hour. I would be very surprised. It shows that we're interesting if they've lasted this
They
long.
lasted this long.
Yeah, if you're in Gwen's class and you're still listening, like props to you, really.
Congratulations.
Congratulations.
You did it. You did.
Sorry for
our
the
implicit
long-
bias is that we're not that interesting.
Yeah, it's crazy. Like we're talking for a long time. I am so surprised. I don't know if I would even be able to listen to us talk. Like I don't know if I can sit here and listen to our conversation again. Like if I was to replay it.
Yeah.
It's
I wonder
tough.
if your teachers made it this far.
Jack,
Professor
we're
Brooks
getting
Clark.
off topic. It's your turn. Go ahead. Take
All
the floor.
right. Well, I guess we're all sharing kind of like negative ones that we have about ourselves. So I'll try to fit there too. I guess that if I had to like find something that I had don't make that face.
That's such a terrible thing to say.
If I had to find something that like I was probably more biased about than other things, then I don't know. I might say it might be because of like my own self-image, but I feel like I'm like biased towards people who are that feels like a wrong way to say that. I want to redo that.
Don't be flustered. You got it.
I don't want to say I'm biased towards these people. That seems wrong to me.
It's okay. Just you got it. Phrase it that way.
I don't know. I feel like I
My favorite.
yeah, I guess well, it's not that I really like favor people. It's more so that I don't want to say I look down on, but I just feel
No need
like
to look good, Jack. Just rip the band-aid. Rip it.
Let him have it. Let him have it. Give him
yeah,
some.
I'm getting there. I'm getting there. It seems like I don't know. What's like the best way to phrase this?
You feel like you're above people?
I feel like I'm just better than everybody, and I'm just kind of like the best person ever. So
Don't sweat it. I know you're better than me.
What?
I don't know. We're talking about like Calvin, you were talking about like how like strengths and like seeing people as stronger or weaker. And I feel like I might have that towards like people probably based in my own insecurities, but like people who are overweight, you know. I would imagine
Oh.
that I like it might be based on how I see myself, but I feel like I look at people who are overweight as like people who don't like try as hard, you know.
Oh, I see. Okay.
And I know that that's like not really true at all, but I think that's been a prevailing bias that I've had to like very consciously go against before.
That was a good one. That was a tough one, bro. I'm proud of you.
That is very good.
I'm very proud of you, Jack. That was very good.
Okay.
Wow, you really made us.
Yeah, that
go
was a
through
tough
the ringer
one.
on that one.
I don't want to offend people, and I'm trying to think of
Oh,
like
no,
Yeah,
that's
no,
the
the
I'll
way
one.
I can like.
it's. I mean, I think it's important
Okay.
because
Yeah,
you-
I asked the question because I felt like
yeah,
we needed to address them at least.
yeah,
You know
we
what
have
I mean?
to address some sort of our own implicit biases,
Yeah.
and then how we actively try to
Yeah.
change it.
Okay, so I guess now how are we actively trying to change it? I feel like I'm trying to, like, when I meet new people, I'm trying to be more open. So that's why I am friendlier towards them. Like, I approach people that I normally wouldn't because I don't want to have these biases. I try to just keep an open mind no matter what. You know, like that for me is so hard to do. Like when I meet somebody new, when I meet someone like of the same race as me, I'm very like, oh God, like I don't want to even like be around you. But I'm actively trying to find like ways that we can click so that I don't feel uncomfortable, so I don't feel this bias, so I'm like, oh, this isn't like a bad person, this isn't like someone that I should feel negative feelings towards because they actually have a lot of positive attributes.
I think for me, in terms of misogyny, this is the things I've done. This is what things I'm still doing and I'm doing now. I remember in high school we would have discussions about feminism. So to a degree, I tried to understand, what feminism really entails and all that fun jazz. Getting to understand the social issue as a whole and what people have, what the issue really entails. That's been one of them. The other one, and I think I kind of like list, I'll probably find it more in climbing, like the best thing, the most like material or substance evidence of like me trying to fight against it is while it's true to a degree that like I am stronger than most of my friends who are climbers and the girls, but they also have a lot of redeeming qualities that I don't have and that I admire from them, So like basically finding qualities that I don't have, but that they surpass me in, and then admiring those qualities or at least trying to like learn from them. So I don't, it's not like thinking that they're like, I don't think that they're weaker, but essentially that I know that, on a physical wise, maybe I'll beat them in an arm wrestle, but they can outclimb me any day of the week. So yeah, that's probably it. Like educating myself on feminism and then really trying to just know what they do better at. I don't know how to describe it, but basically like, keeping an open mind and then also trying to know that what not throwing everything under the bus.
Right.
And I feel like I do a pretty good job with that, just knowing that they do a lot of things better than I do.
Yes. Okay, Jack, your turn.
Yeah, I think that really is kind of the best thing you can do, Calvin, right? Is just kind of look at people for like who they are and what like great things, they can accomplish or contribute. And I think that is kind of the best way to do things. I think for me personally, I want to be better about like calling out like biases when I see them, because that's something I am like kind of poor at, I think. And I think just like, yeah, trying to be I guess like kind of neutral and making sure, put that extra step into not offending people when you have the chance to.
Okay, yes.
Say that he's probably like a very like.
No, Jack is permanent. He's staying in this podcast.
Yes, I did it.
You read the audition, kid.
Yes.
You're gonna be a star.
Yes.
Give me
Let's
stop.
go.
Okay, so what are you guys' last words for whoever made it this far into our podcast? So thank you for watching. We'll do our closing bit later. We don't have one, but it's okay. I can go first. So my last words for you guys is, I guess, or like, yeah, for you guys and for whoever's watching is that like, it's important to address these. It sucks to admit them. As you saw, it kind of sucked for all of us to admit this, but it's really important to just be open. Like, obviously, it's a little harder for us to be 100% open with like how we feel towards people or like feelings because we don't want to offend anybody listening. But you, as viewers, and you guys, us, we after this need to be like 100% honest with ourselves to identify these implicit biases and to like admit them, as well as figure out actively changing our own mindsets on how we feel like we should handle them. Like, I feel like if you're still having these biases, you're handling it wrong. So we have to go out there and actively think about what we can do to be better and to do better. So that's what my last words for you guys are. Follow
For
after that.
everyone. Tough act to follow.
To follow.
If I had to say anything, I mean, okay, for anybody who made it this far, congratulations. Thank you. If you do find us interesting, we have pleasantly succeeded in our podcast mission. And if you want more, like, comment, subscribe.
Ooh, the plug.
At the awkward pause. But that's actually not the end. But if I had to say anything, it's I think finding your implicit biases and your subconscious attitudes is a lot harder than people tend to give, a lot harder than people care to admit. And by care to admit, you saw all three of us just blatantly struggle with admitting it. So it's not a subject that's very easy to talk about. But with that in mind, I think it's okay to be not okay. And I think it's even more okay to be confused. I honestly, that's probably what you're gonna get out of it is just absolute pure confusion. And I'm not saying this, I'm saying this out of experience, but I'm also not saying this as someone who's finished their journey. I'm saying this as someone who's very currently in their journey and been there. So for the last, I don't know, when was sophomore year of high school? 4 or 5 years now.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
I want to say that this has been on my mind for a good while. Growing older.
Over.
So I want to say that, like, in terms of like implicit, biases and, whatever the case may be, it's a lot to think about, and it does shape the way you think, and it makes you think about it. It kind of cracks open a door that most people aren't really considering, and they probably don't even want to consider, as it kind of becomes introspective of their entire life and who they want to be in the future and who they want to be now. At the end of the day, if you're analyzing your implicit biases and you're trying to change who you are, I think that's more than what most people do anyways. And we want to get to the point where most people do that. Most people try to adapt and think about their implicit biases, and no one's perfect, but the goal isn't to be perfect, it's just trying to be better. So I don't know, I think that'll be my last words. If you're still here, thank you, but at the same time, it's not easy to talk about it. It's even harder to talk about like how it's affect you, and it's even worse to trying to change something that's so minuscule yet so massive in your life. Okay.
I think that if I could give like one takeaway, at least for from myself to whoever is listening, I think the best thing that you can do for yourself as a person to kind of move past any implicit biases that you might have, or even like help others move past theirs, is just kind of get out there and actually like get to know people who are different from you. And I think that is kind of the root of a lot of the conflict and biases that we create. I don't know. I think that that's the best thing that you can do for yourself in order to help like rid yourself of biases that you might not even know you have. And I think that would be the one thing I would want people to take away.
Talk about it, bro. Talk about it, dude.
Oh my goodness. Wow. Well, thank you for joining us. Oh, am I doing the closing? Is it me?
It's your project.
Yeah.
It's your class.
Well, thank you for joining us for our first podcast. I don't know when our next one will be, nor do I know what we will be talking about. But thank you for joining us and listening to our difficult conversation about implicit biases and stereotypes and what we thought about it in our own, and like just a bunch of questions, a lot of stuff, you know what I mean? Yeah. Yes. Yes.
The awkward pause.
Like, comment, subscribe, let us know. Oh yes, for all of my classmates out there, for all the people who are not my classmates as well out there watching us, let us know if we're interesting, but also let us know what you want us to talk about next, because we don't know.
We also don't know if this is gonna be a weekly series or a monthly series, but this is a pretty fun time.
Yeah,
fun
let
video.
us
I
know
should
how
do
you
it.
feel about us. Let us know how often you want to see our faces.
Okay.
But
Are you
yes.
gonna like say like one closing like I'm Calvin?
I'm Gwen.
I'm Calvin.
I'm Jack.